As you know, modulation is the process through which a piece transitions to a new key. The most common way to achieve a modulation is through the use of a pivot chord, which is a chord that exists in both the original key and the new key. For example, if you're trying to modulate from C major to G major, the sixth chord in C major, which is an A minor triad, could pivot to become a 2 chord in G major. The chord is approached as if it were 6 in C major, but then proceeds as if it were 2 in G major. In order to use a diatonic pivot chord, the original key and the goal key must contain chords in common. For this to be the case, the two keys must be closely related on the circle of fifths. If you're in a major key, it's easy to modulate to the key of the dominant because that's just one step away on the circle of fifths. C and G majors contain most of the same notes in their key signature, and so they share many chords. C major and A flat major, on the other hand, do not share any chords. It is therefore impossible to modulate from C major to A flat major using a diatonic pivot chord. C major is also closely related to F major, which is one step away on the circle of fifths in the other direction from G major. C and F major share several diatonic chords, any of which can be used as a diatonic pivot chord. If we add minor keys, we see that A minor, D minor, and E minor are all closely related to C major on the circle of fifths. So that gives us 5 possible keys to modulate to: 5, 4, 6, 3, and 2. Notice that these are all of the keys whose tonic is a chord that exists in C major. If we're starting from a minor key, say A minor, we have these same keys to work with: C major, G major, F major, E minor, and D minor. That is, we can easily modulate from a minor key to the key of 3, 7, 6, 5, and 4. Of all of these possible keys, some are more common than others. In general, major keys tend to modulate to 5, 6, or 3, and minor keys tend to modulate to 3, 5, or 6. Let's look at modulating from a minor key to the key of 3, which is its relative major. Suppose we're starting in E minor and want to modulate to G major. These two keys have the same key signature, but their chords are not all the same. Here are all of the diatonic triads in E minor. All of these chords appear in G major except those that contain D sharps, which are the 7 chord and the 5 chord. So that leaves us with 5 possible pivot chords. Remember that the best pivot chords are those that can function as predominant in the new key. 2 of our 5 possible pivots qualify, 6 becoming 4 and 4 becoming 2. The latter of these, 4 becoming 2, is the most common pivot chord because this chord can function as predominant in both keys. Here's an example of a particularly smooth modulation from E minor to G major using this pivot chord. These 8 bars are a parallel period. We start in E minor and end up at a half cadence halfway through measure 4. In the consequent, we start with a 1 chord in E minor, followed by a 4/6 chord in the following measure. The next chord we get is a D dominant 7th chord in the penultimate measure. This chord does not exist in E minor, even though there are no accidentals. This chord belongs exclusively to the key of G major. We therefore must have pivoted before this chord. The 4/6 chord in the previous measure was reinterpreted as 2/6 in G major. So this is the pivot chord, and it leads us smoothly to a PAC in G major. When analyzing modulations from a minor key to its relative major, it's sometimes hard to spot the first clue that the piece has modulated. The first clue will usually be a 5 chord in the key of 3 because this chord doesn't exist in the original minor key. This excerpt from a Mozart sonata modulates from F minor to A flat major. Can you find the pivot chord? Look for the first 5 chord in the key of A flat, which might be in an inversion, and then back up 1 chord to find the pivot chord. Write down your analysis and bring it to class. Let's look at one more example, this time of a piece beginning in a major key. Let's listen first. This piece begins in C major and has a long tonic pedal in the bass. Toward the end of this excerpt, we get lots of D sharps and F sharps, ending on an E minor chord. So here we modulate to the key of 3 from C major to E minor. In the measure before all of the sharps appear, we have a 1 chord in the key of C, but on the last beat, the G in the left hand moves up to A, making a 6/6 chord. Since the next chord is purely in E minor, this 6/6 chord is probably the pivot chord. Specifically, 6/6 in C major becomes 4/6 in E minor, which is a predominant chord leading to the dominant in the following measure. The 5 chord in E minor is prolonged with a pedal 6/4 before resolving to tonic. Let's listen again.